Welcome back to Next Door, your go-to channel for all things Heartland fans. Today, we discuss Ty Borden's shocking and heartbreaking return in Season 19, Episode 1. For years, we believed Ty was gone forever. Amy had moved on, raising Lindy as a single mother while the rest of the Heartland family tried to heal. However, Ty is back, alive, at Heartland Ranch, and prepared to confront the family that thought they had lost him in a shocking turn of fate. How does Amy react when she sees the man she's been with all her life? How does Lindy process meeting the father she never knew? And how does Ty explain the impossible? We're breaking down every emotional reunion, every heartbreaking moment, and the powerful conversation between Ty and Amy that will change everything. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Next Flying for more Heartland content. Now, let's get into it. Over Heartland Ranch, the sun was just beginning to rise, illuminating the sky in delicate pink and orange tones. Standing in the stables, Amy stroked Spartan's mane slowly and carefully. She was surrounded by the familiar scent of hay and horses, which soothed her as she had grown accustomed to it over time. Despite the peace of the morning, a heaviness still lingered in her heart, one that never truly faded, no matter how much time had passed. It had been years since Ty's passing, yet she still felt his presence in every corner of Heartland. She often caught herself expecting to hear his voice, see his familiar silhouette in the distance, or feel his warm embrace at the end of a long day. However, those moments did not occur. Instead, there was only silence, a painful, endless silence. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against Spartan's neck. "We're fine, boy, aren't we?" she murmured. But even as she said the words, a part of her wasn't convinced. A strange, unfathomable sensation settled in her chest as she stood there lost in thought. It was as if something had changed in the universe. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her heart began to race without reason. Slowly, she lifted her head and turned toward the front of the ranch. Her breath hitched. Her vision blurred for a moment, but when she blinked, the sight before her remained. There, standing just a few feet away, was Ty Borden. Amy's body froze, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. He stood still, his gaze locked onto hers. His expression was unreadable. His face was familiar, yet changed, his hair slightly longer, his body leaner, his eyes filled with emotions she couldn't yet decipher. Was she in a dream? Was this a mind-boggling, cruel trick? Her hands began to tremble, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She had spent a lot of time in mourning him, learning to live without him, and convincing herself that he would never return. And there he was, still alive, in front of her. Ty took a hesitant step forward, and Amy instinctively stepped back, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. "Amy," his voice was raw with emotion. She was shaken to her core by the sound. She tried to speak, but no words came out of her mouth. She wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms, but fear kept her rooted in place. What if this wasn't real? What if, the moment she reached out, he would disappear like a fading dream? Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. "Ty," she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. He nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. That was all it took. Her legs gave out from under her, and before she could fall, Ty rushed forward, catching her in his arms. The warmth of his touch, the solid presence of his body, it was real. He was real. As she clung to him and buried her face in his chest, she let out a sob. Ty cradled her in his arms and held her as if he would never let go. "I thought I lost you," she gasped, her fingers digging into his jacket as if afraid he might disappear. Ty pressed a kiss to her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped trying to get in touch with you again." Tears streamed down Amy's face as she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. How? How is this possible?" Ty took a deep breath, his hands still gently holding her arms. "Amy, there's so much to explain. Before he could finish, a small voice interrupted them. "Mommy?" Amy's breath caught in her throat. She turned to see Lindy standing in the doorway, her big, curious eyes fixed on Ty. Even though she had never met the man in front of her before, her expression was one of confusion mixed with something else, something almost instinctive. As he looked at his daughter for the first time, Ty sharply inhaled and felt every muscle in his body tighten. His daughter, the young girl he had so long longed for. He had never held or observed the child grow. His throat became tighter. He wanted to move, to speak, but for the first time, he didn't know what to say. Lindy stepped cautiously forward. "Who is he?" As she looked up at her mother, she asked softly. Taking a deep breath, Amy knelt down next to her daughter. She whispered, "Lindy, sweetheart, this is your daddy." Her mouth was filled with almost surreal-sounding words. As she looked back at Ty, Lindy blinked. Her small brows furrowed in concentration, as if trying to understand something too big for her young mind. Ty finally found his voice. "Lindy," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's me. I'm your dad." A heavy silence filled the air. Then, in a move that shattered the hearts of everyone watching, Lindy took another step forward, then another. Slowly, she reached out her tiny hands, brushing against Ty's. As he carefully knelt at her level, a single tear fell from his cheek. "You're real," she whispered. Ty nodded and let out a choked laugh. "Yes, my love, I am real." Without another word, Lindy wrapped her arms around him, pressing her small face against his chest. Ty's entire body trembled as he held her for the first time, his heart nearly breaking from the overwhelming emotion. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered against his shoulder. Amy covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face as she watched the moment unfold. Ty pressed a trembling kiss to Lindy's hair, whispering, "I'll never leave you again." "I do promise." The powerful reunion wasn't just felt by Amy and Lindy. Inside the house, Jack Bartlett had seen everything from the porch. The old cowboy, who had always been the family's strongest, felt his heart break when he saw the boy who he had thought was his son standing there, alive. Grasping the porch railing as if the ground beneath him were shaking, Jack stumbled back. He had buried Ty. He had grieved for him. And now, here he was. Jack spoke barely above a whisper, "Ty." As he slowly moved forward, his normally sturdy hands began to shake. Ty turned, his eyes locking onto Jack's. The weight of years of grief, love, and unspoken words hung between them. Ty took a big inhale. "It's me, Jack." Jack's breath was labored. He said, his voice cracking for the first time in years, "I buried you, son. I arranged flowers for your grave." Ty's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I know, Jack," he whispered. "And I'm so sorry." Jack didn't wait another second. He strode forward and pulled Ty into a tight embrace, his strong arms shaking as he held him. "You don't know how much we've missed you," Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Ty's grip on Jack tightened. "Jack, I missed you as well." And just like that, the years of pain and grief melted away. Inside the house, Lou stood frozen, her coffee cup trembling in her hands as she stared out the window. She had been busy in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Katie and Parker, when a strange noise from outside caught her attention. At first, she thought she was imagining things. It could have been just another morning at Heartland, with the usual neighing of horses and rustling of the trees. But something about the way Jack gasped made her stop in her tracks. Jack never sputtered. Jack never wavered in his cool. That alone sent a chill down her spine. Slowly, she stepped toward the window, her heart already hammering in her chest. The moment her eyes landed on the sight outside, the moment she saw Ty Borden standing there, holding Amy and Lindy in his arms, her entire body locked up. The air was suddenly too thick, too heavy to breathe. "No," Lou whispered, shaking her head as she took an unsteady step backward. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She had watched Amy grieve. She had grieved herself. She had spent sleepless nights at Amy's bedside, holding her sister as she cried, trying to be strong when she felt like crumbling herself. She had assumed the protective role of reassuring Amy and keeping the family moving forward despite the terrible loss. And now, here he was. Ty Borden. Alive. Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of the original scene, preserving its emotional weight and adding more depth to the character's inner thoughts and surroundings. The coffee cup slipped from her grasp. Before striking the hardwood floor with a sharp, shattering crack, it tumbled slowly, the ceramic glinting in the morning light. Lou barely heard the sound as the fragments shattered like her heart, ringing in her ears. Her surroundings seemed to veer off course. She let out a gasp that was choked out. She clutched her hands over her mouth, her body trembling, struggling to hold herself together even as everything was falling apart. No, this isn't real, she whispered, the words a fragile plea that dissolved into the thick silence of the room. Her voice cracked under the weight of disbelief, and her knees threatened to give out beneath her. But the image didn't fade. Through the blur of sudden tears, she saw him Tay. He was standing in the doorway, breathing, alive. With one arm still gently bracing Lindy on his hip like he had never left, he was holding Amy close. Like time hadn't stopped the day he left? As the warm and unchecked tears began to fall faster, Lou's breath hitched. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She pushed through the front door with a burst of desperate energy, her voice breaking as she called out his name. Tay! It came out barely louder than a whisper, but it was enough. He turned at the sound of her voice. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, time stood still again. A dam of emotions broke loose between them, grief, love, confusion, disbelief, anger, and a longing so deep it hurt to breathe. For a beat, neither of them moved. Lou scanned his face like it was a puzzle she was trying to solve, piecing together the man before her with the memory of the one she'd lost. Her brother-in-law, her friend, the man who had once been a constant in her life. They had laughed together, argued like siblings, leaned on each other during the hardest of times. He had been family. The man whose absence had torn a hole in all their lives. Lutai finally said, his voice rough with emotion, barely more than a breath. That was all it took. She ran to him, a sob ripping from her throat as her arms flung around him. She clung to him as if afraid he'd vanish again if she blinked. The warmth of him, the solidity, it all felt impossibly real. Ty barely had time to brace himself before she collided with him, her body trembling against his. You're here. You're real, she cried, the words muffled against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her like he was securing them both in place and held her tightly. His tears mixed with hers, silent but just as telling. I'm here, he whispered, his voice thick. Then her sorrow twisted into something else. Anger. You broke all of us, Lou said through clenched teeth, still clutching his jacket. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You broke Amy. You broke Lindy. You broke this family. And now you just come back. She stepped back just enough to look at him, her eyes stormy with 1,000 questions. Where have you been? Why didn't you come home? We waited. We grieved. Her voice faltered. We needed you. Ty dropped his gaze, his jaw tightening. Like lightning in a storm, his features flashed with pain. It's a long story, Lo, he said quietly. But I swear, I never stopped trying to come back. Her heart was caught between aching hope and the need to shield it from further harm as Lou studied his face. But his eyes were not deceitful. No deception. He was this, Tay. And suddenly, her anger crumbled under the weight of relief. She reached up, gently placing her hands on his cheeks, as if to prove to herself he was really there. Her touch was light, reverent. She whispered, I never thought I would see you again. Ty leaned into her palm, his hand covering hers. He admitted, I never thought I would make it back. She sniffled, barely holding back another wave of tears. Well, she said, her voice low and trembling, you're home now. And that's all that matters. Across the ranch, Georgie Fleming Morris stood motionless near the barn, a curry brush still clutched in her hand, frozen halfway through brushing Phoenix's coat. When she heard something from the house, she had been lost in thought and letting the rhythmic motion of grooming calm her. A gasp, loud and sharp. Then Amy's sobs. Then Jack's voice trembling in a way that sent a chill down her spine. Something was wrong. The air felt different, thicker, stiller. The birds had stopped chirping. The ranch, usually so full of life, suddenly felt too quiet. She turned slowly, the brush falling from her hand without her noticing. Step by hesitant step, she made her way toward the house, her heart thudding with every movement. She then observed him, Ty, her big brother, her protector, the man who had taught her how to ride when she was too scared to try, who had stayed up late with her when she had nightmares, who had shown her what it meant to care for horses, to be strong, to be gentle. The man she had looked up to, mourned, buried in her heart. And yet, there he was standing there like nothing had changed. Her chest tightened. Her legs nearly buckled. Her whole body was swallowed by an odd hollowness that appeared in her chest. No, this couldn't be happening. She had spent years convincing herself he was gone, that life had to move forward without him, that what they had lost couldn't be returned. But he was right there. Georgie Ty's voice was soft, cautious, tender. He took a single step forward. That was all it took. A broken sob escaped her, and suddenly she was running. Ty! She screamed, her voice raw and thick with emotion. She flung herself into his arms, crashing into him like a wave. She held him so tightly it hurt, like letting go might break her again. Ty wrapped her in his arms, burying his face into her shoulder, his own body trembling with emotion. She yelled into his chest, I missed you so much, putting her fingers in his jacket to bind herself to him. He kissed her hair while whispering, I missed you too, kiddo. More than you'll ever know. Georgie pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her cheeks streaked with tears. I thought I lost you forever, she whispered. I thought I lost all of you too, he admitted, his voice barely steady. She shed yet more tears as she shook her head. Don't ever do that to us again, ever. Ty gave a small, pained smile. I won't, he promised. I swear. Not everything about Ty's return to Heartland is about coming home. It's about healing, rebuilding, learning how to breathe again in a world that had learned to survive without him. But the question remains, can the wounds of the past truly heal? Will Amy and Ty find their way back to each other? Can he find his place in the life he once left behind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more Heartland updates here on Next Door. We'll see you in the next one.